I have 3 goals today, right? You got to have a goal in life. Number 1, we want to be educational. Number 2, we're going to be inspirational. And number 3, we're going to be entertaining. So hold on to your hats and get ready to go. You guys ready? Yes. All right, here we go. They don't even know these questions are coming. You guys ready? All right, Dwight. This is the big opener here, right? Let's level set. What's one assumption about the future of supply chain technology you think is overhyped and one that's underestimated?
Al, the 800-pound gorilla. I really do think it's both. And I kind of said that yesterday. I think on one hand, it's overhyped. And if any of you ever looked at Gartner research, we have something called a hype cycle. And a hype cycle looks a lot like a roller coaster, and you see technology emerge. It kind of merges on the left side, and it kind of takes a while to peak. But oftentimes it gets to the peak and it comes down the backside, like if you've ever been in a big roller coaster that crashes down to the bottom, and then sometimes it doesn't emerge, but it does. And I think that's where we are with AI right now. It's being overhyped. It's going to solve world hunger. I think a lot of the news broadcasts, there's going to be mass unemployment due to AI. It's scaring a lot of people. I'm not one of those people. I had the same issue with robots. I don't think we're going to have mass unemployment due to robots. But at the same time, that's all that overhype. I think we're underestimating some of the impact of it. And I just saw your session on ESG. One of the things I think, and I said this yesterday in my session, is I think some of the things that we see that are short-term that AI is doing, helping with the decision-making, I think it's going to have a lot of impacts on change management. Are we going to use this technology? It's going to be very powerful, but are we going to enable our users to really take advantage of it? So I think it's really going to put a lot of emphasis on organizations to educate their people, focus more on change management, because otherwise it's going to be a really expensive paperweight that people put a lot of money into. And then my fear when we've seen people do that with technologies, oftentimes then it takes years later because people, they think they've wasted money. Probably the best example many of us know of a technology like that was RFID. If you remember RFID from 2000s, the early 2000s, 2004, it was super overhyped. People spent a lot of money, mainly because Walmart and others were pushing it. And people spent a lot of money and then it just disappeared. But what we actually are seeing at Gartner before I left is a lot going on, but there's a lot of skepticism on the part of management now because it basically became a worthless technology and a paperweight. Yet now the technology has matured, but they don't want to put money into it. And I'm afraid that could be the same thing with AI.
What's overhyped is an AI. What's underhyped is the organizational change management to embrace that technology. All right, Ed, if we had this conversation 3 years ago versus today, what's fundamentally changed and what hasn't?
Well, 3 years ago, and I think everybody's seeing this is that AI was just a pilot, right? We were testing it out, figuring it out, and now it's in production. Companies are utilizing it at large scale. And the adoption, it's happened so quickly. And I feel like a lot of companies are trying to play catch up to stay there. So again, the takeaway is hey, it's here to stay. Let's figure out how to utilize it at the best we can.
So that's what's changed. What hasn't changed?
I think what hasn't changed is last mile, right? Is still the most complicated, most expensive piece of the supply chain. And how is AI going to tackle that piece of it, right? Effectively to deliver that ROI back to the companies that invest in AOI components.
You mean you're not using a drone with your TMS and delivering it to people's front doors yet?
So I will say it's happening, right? The routing optimization component, because that's what's powering these drones. So I think we're going to see that. It's going to be very interesting how that comes about.
Let's talk about disruption to adaptation. So Janet, we've been talking a lot about disruption for years. At this point, constant disruption, it's the new operating model, right?
Yep.
So what does truly adaptive supply chain look like in practice? Not conceptually, but in practice.
Yeah, I can liken that to, we have some facilities that we do primarily just co-packing, co-manufacturing, VAS operations. We can have, upwards of 20 plus production lines. Now, ideally you're planning those out for the day. That's perfect world, but where the adaptation comes in is giving the operators, giving the leaders the data, the real-time visibility, the continuous improvement suggestions to be able to walk in the morning and say, you know what, I planned these 2 lines for this customer. Now it's going to be this customer. You make sure all your employees can switch and do everything. You plan for that to be adaptive and proactive, and that's what it looks like, because that's the reality is, you're getting calls in the morning, or you're seeing the data that this line is not being optimal. Okay, let's fix it, or let's move it to a different line. You have to react that way.
So being able to give the empowerment to the team and the data to the team to make the right decisions.
That's it.
Very, very cool. All right, what's one operational change that you've made or your organization's made in the last 12 to 18 months that directly reflects this shift?
Well, 12 to 18 months, I mean, it's cybersecurity, which isn't a change. It's not new. It's just the amount of attention and focus that we have to put on cybersecurity. As we bring in all these new tools that give us real-time visibility and optimization, and of course AI, you have to remain secure. And so that pressure on keeping that cybersecurity just tight is just ramped up. It's on steroids basically now, as opposed to 2 years ago.
All right, we're going to go AI from buzzword to execution. So everyone's saying we're using AI. Where are you actually seeing measurable impact today? And then where is it still mostly experimental? So I'll start with you, Ed.
Yeah, where I'm seeing it the most is on route load optimization, dynamic sequencing, right? That and capacity management, which is very interesting. You're paying a lot for space. It's utilizing every bit of that space at the highest level. That's where AI is really impacting. I would say where it's struggling is just connecting all the SKUs that are out there still, right? There's still a little confusion and matching that up, but as quickly as it's evolving, I feel that that's going to be coming up fairly soon.
Well, I think, like I said yesterday, the first thing is you have to say, what's AI? Mm-hmm. We use that term, as an umbrella term. There's lots of different types of AI. So if we start there, there's a lot of vision AI. We saw examples here that's been around for a while. Machine learning. We've seen that in labor management systems, for example, where people are using that to, instead of, industrial engineer with a clipboard and a stopwatch, we can now use, machine learning algorithms to actually create goal standards. When we start talking whatever the buzzwords, the generative AI, we're starting to see that in like intelligent help and those types of things, chatbots. From an implementation standpoint, we're seeing people use that for integrations, or it can facilitate things like helping with integrations. We're certainly seeing early, uses for that for the actual implementations. I talked about, TurboTax for implementations. I think that's more in its infancy, but it's moving very quickly to help, kind of facilitate some of those types of things. Agentic, we're seeing a little of that. I would say that's a little earlier at this point in time. The experiments we're seeing there, it's still very much, they're building some small applets, I'd almost say, using agentic, but it's still very much human in the loop where it's making certain decisions. We haven't really seen people take that to fully autonomous agentic, where it's just making the decisions and executing on those. But a lot of the algorithmic things that we might call AI, that's maybe using prescriptive analytics, we've seen around for several years already. Again, I mentioned vendors like a CogniOps or an AutoSchedule AI. Those have been around for a while, and they're live and working in clients already.
All right, well, let's bring it down to the ground, right? So Janet, you're representing the users out there, right? So what's one decision today that you would allow AI to make, and what are you not ready to hand over the reins to AI yet on?
Yeah, we're firmly comfortable with letting AI do help desk, chatbots, that sort of thing. Definitely with document intelligence. giving us the data in better summarized form than we could get it by reading 100 pages of it, and using that data. That we're about there. Which one of the things I've really got from this conference is we're all kind of in the same place a little bit.
Right.
We're just starting to use it, feel comfortable with it, so it's nice.
And then what would you not be ready to hand over to AI?
Yeah, I mean, we're still trusting and verifying for sure. We're in that phase. We'll take that analysis, we'll take that data, but we are, the humans are still making the decisions and doing the planning and doing the waves and that sort of thing.
We're going to move to automation and orchestration. So I don't know, how many of you out there were able to go to Modex in Atlanta? A few. So what was interesting coming out of Modex, everybody had talked about orchestration, right? That was the big takeaway from that show. Islands of automation, orchestration, how do you make that happen inside the four walls? So Ed, given the number of projects that Locus has been involved with, what's a good starting point for orchestration?
I think, and everybody's, I'm sure, seeing this, it's visibility. You can't orchestrate, you can't optimize what you do not see. So it's getting that visibility, and a win that we've had, and where I see a huge impact, is with the 3PL managing 50 plus partner, carrier networks, and being able to connect that and put it all under one roof, right? That's where you start seeing that impact and just the visibility into it.
So that's a good starting point. What was the most complex and successful orchestration you've been a part of, and why?
Well, I'd go back to leaning on the 3PL, and I would say it's connecting those disconnected carrier networks out there, pulling it all in and giving them actionable insight into the network visibility and the network opportunities. It was key to pull that all under one umbrella instead of having it in siloed different areas where they couldn't really make decisions quick. And I mean, the supply chain is moving at near real time now.
It's a good point. I mean, visibility is one, advanced, appointment scheduling, execution, real-time execution inside the four walls, outside the four walls. So we're getting better on that. Mm-hmm. But Janet, let's bring it back to the floor, right? So thinking about, automation and orchestration, what's an example where automation actually made the operation more complex instead of more efficient?
I don't know that I have an example where, because I feel like in at least on all the areas that I've had exposure to with automation, it's made it better, right? But what I've seen is that the building the relationship with the automation vendor has added a lot of complexity to the startup, to the support. Going back to being secure, cybersecurity, you have a whole new point of failure. You have to make sure they're talking to each other, they're in sync, they're secure, everybody's secure. You got a good RACI, you got a good, all those things that's where I've seen the most complexity, just dealing with automation in general. But I think, it does add a lot of work. But from what I've seen, where we've used automation, it's been worth it. It just made us better and more efficient.
So you use the word RACI, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a very, very important term, right? Roles, accountability, and thinking about every project, no matter if it's small or large, you really need to make sure everybody understands what's their side of the equation, what are they responsible for, and how do you bring this together? So the automation's working. We're seeing warehouses adopt it. The problem is how do you integrate to islands of automation and orchestrate the whole thing? So,
well, can I just if I
go right
could, because I think this ties to gray oranges here. I think, just to tie back to the Modex thing yesterday is, we've had automation in warehouses for the last 40 years, but we used to distinguish between what we call large scale automation versus where we're headed, which is flexible automation. Large scale, you'd bring in a big systems integrator, you or Dematic or somebody, and they designed a system and they would deliver it almost as a construction project. That still exists, it's going to exist, but those are big, complex, like I said, construction projects. With the flexible automation, that created a different orchestration project. Oh, I bring in a Locus robotics thing, I got to pick the light system, I got a Cubiscan system, maybe I'm bringing in a truck unloading robot. And I saw this problem at Gartner when I started doing the robots. I thought the first issue was just integrating. How do I get MadeForNet to talk to Locus? But as I started to think about that, well, we started to see companies, they started to bring these different pieces of automation. So say maybe I start with Locus helping me with collaborative picking, but then I want to do sorting. Well, now I have to coordinate between, picking and sorting, and then maybe I want to do packing, but then, I really want to do Boston Dynamics or Pickle to do truck unloading. Now I have to figure out how to get these different pieces of automation to work together. And that's the next level of orchestration. And they're not humans, but WMSs were really designed that the work all went through a human. So now I need something that's going to figure out how to get these pieces of automation to work together. And so we kind of created this model. You saw it on my slide yesterday called multi-agent orchestration platform. Gray Orange kind of talked about something similar. But we kind of said, well, the first thing is I got to be able to integrate. Everybody says, well, there's an API. Well, what we figured out, well, that's kind of a oversimplification. Just because I have an API, sometimes an API spec, is like that. So there's an integration challenge, but that's not enough. Then I have the orchestration. How do I coordinate that work? And, just aligning my picking process with my sorting. Well, what order gets picked when has to know when I'm going to sort, right? So there's some coordination. But then if I'm going to do that, at some point I'm going to want to optimize it, right? I want to say when's I have to go out the door and when do I need to sort what? And then the final thing, what we were hearing from clients, a lot of the robot companies had nice analytics. Locus had some nice stuff for Locus. They didn't have a single pane of glass that said, how can I watch all of that across that? So that's where we kind of said, the more and the more I move to that flexible automation, that's what kind of gray orange, but there's other vendors that do that same thing. That's where it started to get different. I wasn't delivering that one big system we used to do, and people wanted that flexible automation, right? It's just like you look at your personal computer. You don't want to be, captive to one single vendor. You want to say, hey, I want to put in a new monitor. I just want to go get the best monitor, the cheapest monitor, and be able to plug it in. And that's what this new flexible automation is doing. But it now creates that need for how do I orchestrate all that stuff.
So think about the integration reality check, Ed. Most companies don't have a technology problem, they have an integration problem. Where do the integrations still break down?
That's great, and to kind of, that's where AI can come in and kind of help make those decisions, particularly with what Dwight was talking about. The break is with that disparaged technology. So you've got old ERP systems, old carrier networks, and it's trying to ensure that that connection stays valid. And that's where the biggest breaks are, old WMSs, right, that aren't adapting to move with the times. And so, you can have the best technology stacks in place, but if there's something that's old and antiquated, it's where you're going to have a potential break, and that could be catastrophic throughout the entire operations, right?
How about you, Dwight? How should companies rethink integrations as an ecosystem gets more complex?
Well, I think that absolutely. I think that's it's a real opportunity. I would say transportation was tough enough, but at least they had some standards. External integration for some of the 3PLs, same kind of thing. At least they had EDI. And the big joke with standards, the problem with standards is too many standards. So even with the EDI, you have 10 customers, there's 11 different standards, right? The problem inside is, like I said, if you had a Cubiscan system, a conveyor system, like you said, a verticalist, they're all completely different. 5 different WMS systems, they're all different. There's where I think we're starting to see some nice things about, leveraging things like generative AI that can help do some of those mappings that were very manual. Again, just because I have an API, I have an API spec like that on one side, an API spec like that, that's still sometimes weeks of effort to try to do that. And if I just do that once, and everybody talks about WMS to ERP, well, I do that once. all this other stuff I have to connect to. I go out and buy a new Cubiscan system. Well, I got to do that. So I think that's really going to help us and do that. But then to Eric's point, you got to maintain it. Somebody upgrades something and they do new firmware. Guess what? I had this happen at home. My, had to upgrade my Windows and it broke the connection to my printer. So I had to go down and figure out how to download new firmware for my printer because I wouldn't print anything. And that's the other thing that happens with all these connections. It's not just the first time. It's not going to maintain that over time. So I think that's where hopefully technology is going to simplify that. But right now, there still is a fair amount of manual effort.
Dwight, you're really helping out with that inspirational portion of this.
I'm thinking
educational, inspirational, entertaining. Yeah, you're really giving the inspiration there. All right. So
there's some vendors, there are some vendors. I'm not here to try to sell other vendors that have actually done some cool things there that I'm encouraged for that are trying to simplify some of that. So
yeah, no, the integration platform as a service out there, MuleSoft, Boomi, Celigo, right?
Yeah.
They've got their work cut out for them. Enterprise application, WMS, TMS, but I think inside the four walls, there's a whole nother, those don't scale down, and there's going to be a WES or a orchestration layer.
Or you have an SVT in the robot space that do some of that from a automation standpoint. So
all right, so
we're
still on integration, and hopefully we'll get some education or at least some entertainment here, Janet. Tell us about a time when everything looked connected, everything was operationally looked good, but then when you actually went on the floor, it didn't work like it was supposed to.
That's every time.
What? Every time?
That's every time.
See, there's the entertainment we were looking for. How about that?
That's every time, yeah. It always looks good on paper. These are going to talk perfectly with each other. But, I think where it typically breaks down is the data. Yeah. I think that we underestimate the effort we need to put into understanding the complexity of the data. The item master, the tie highs and, all that different information, because if you don't get that right, you could be pouring that onto your, and I'm in IT, so, sorry. I could be pouring it onto my operators and, and they'd have to swivel seat or, and in some cases, you could put, people on the floor at risk if the data's not. If you don't understand it and map it correctly.
Let's talk about sustainability versus reality. So I'm a big ESG fan, and we got 193 countries out there with 17 goals to reduce our carbon footprint and be a better sustainable world. So Ed, sustainability is a priority, but also at a cost center. Where are you actually seeing some ROI?
I see the deep ROI in just the optimization component. So you're optimizing routes, you're optimizing idle time. You're optimizing miles and capacity usage, and that kind of just falls right into the sustainability piece, okay, and impacts the ESG component because you're optimizing, you're actually reducing your carbon footprint. So I think to reduce cost internally, the transport costs, which are phenomenal across the board right now, continuing to rise, they're automatically creating a sustainability factor. That the component, though, you've got to track it. You have to have some KPIs in place where you can really...
I'm sorry, did you say you have to measure it?
Measure it.
There we go. All right, let's go.
And that's important, right?
It is.
Because you have to have something where you can point to it, then you can start calculating numbers, and then you can show a solid ROI to go back.
All right, bringing it back to the floor, Janet. What's one sustainability initiative that delivered real operational value, not just reporting value?
Yeah, I mean, a real practical example, in my world that I work in, we have about 13, 14 warehouses in the Chicago area that went through and revamped all their lighting, LED, motion detected lighting, and that certainly gives you energy efficiencies and saves on cost, but they've also seen improvements in performance. Safety, just because the lighting's better, maintenance, you don't have to get up there and change light bulbs as often, and that all, it's small, and it's practical, it's kind of low-hanging fruit, but, it makes an impact.
All right, we're moving to the next section here. So it's technology selection, fit over features. So Ed, there are more technology options than ever. What separates companies that get real value from those that don't?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's defining, before you start your process of looking, you need to define your problem. And that's important as you move forward. And going back to measuring, right? Once you define that problem, you need to track what impacts it's going to do to bring it back, right? And then you can put ROI and you can put tangible numbers on that. Again, define it in the beginning before you start the feature, looking for features, and that's a huge differentiator.
That's big. How about you, Janet? What's one question every company should ask before selecting a new supply chain technology?
I mean, these days, I'm like, dude, you got to show me how. You know what I mean? I need.
You're from Missouri. Show me.
You know, I need real world examples. I need, you know, a customer I can talk to, prove a concept. You know, technology is expensive. You know, you have to. It's hard to go into it without having, you know, at least some measure of confidence that it's going to do what you need it to do.
So if they show it and you talk to somebody, what are you resolving? Your fear? Is it just getting some comfort with it? Or?
Yeah, because you know, they can solve the world's problems, right? I mean, you talk to anybody, like, I need this, and oh yeah, we can do all that for you, right? So, but you know, and it always sounds good, right? But you need some evidence, and to me, that's, you know, give me a demo. I mean, I've had a recent example where, you know, we had a need and we went to two different companies, and they both said they could do it, and one, I mean, they just would not show us.
Okay.
It's like, no, yeah, we're not wasting any more time with you.
Show me the money.
That's right.
All right. Not a kickback.
Not a
rebate.
kickback, no.
All right. All right. We're going to stay with the technology selection fit over feature. Dwight, where do you keep seeing companies consistently getting this wrong? Fit over features.
Well, I would kind of add to what they both said is, I think I said this yesterday too, is I think the first thing that we see is, in WMS in particular, is just replicating what I already have. And I think this is the other thing when I said that we're really excited about the potential of AI facilitating implementations. But a lot of people say, well, then I'm not going to need a consultant. And I said, no, I really think it changes the role that consultants, as opposed to, it's just like in taxes. You know, if I can go prepare my taxes using TurboTax, that's great. So that can take my tax preparation from $400 to $75. What I want is someone that can help me save maybe $40,000. No, I don't make that much money. I just use that number, by the way. By helping me say, hey, if you did this, you'll save this amount of money. And I see too many the thousands of calls I took with clients, too often this is what we were doing, this is what we're going to implement. Well, no, if you're going to go do a new WMS, what can we do better? What are some of the goals and objectives? Let's focus on the future versus replicating what we're doing today. Because that's where we'd oftentimes say, oh, we had these customizations, so we're going to spend all this money to perpetuate those, versus maybe we can get rid of that, or we could do something different. Or there's all this other stuff we could be doing that we're not doing. And that's where I think, you know, the vendors, to be frank, the good vendors, I think we saw starting to do that. We used to talk about the vendors. They're very good at what I call keyboard consulting. Tell me what you needed, and I can tell you how to configure my system to do that. What they couldn't say is, if you went in and said, look, my goal is to improve my throughput by 10%. Well, here, you know, let's think about it. 10% could be a labor issue, could be a slotting issue, could be a warehouse design issue. You know, you were talking about in your sustainability, there's a lot of things you could come in. You know, most of your WMS vendors couldn't help you with any of those things. You know, that's where the real value is if you go into another system. And then that would also influence your selection process. If those are the things that are going to drive the value, then those are the things I'm going to want to focus on, not just, oh, this is the way I do it today. I want to customize my next system. I want to look at, hey, wave planning. I want to look at your wave planning capabilities, your task interleaving, your labor management. So we just saw too many, you know, companies that got done with the implementation. They go, you know what? I just spent $5 million. I don't think I got any value out of it, because all they did was they copied what they already had, versus really saying, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to see if I can drive additional value from it.
All right, so we're talking about AI, we're talking about hype, we're talking about disruption. We're going to talk about talent and change management, right? So Janet, we talk a lot about technology. Where are the people and process still the biggest constraint?
It's really just getting the education and the training to the people, to the right people, delivering it in an effective and timely manner. I think the days of the big rollout are probably over. You need to have something that's continuous, because let's face it, like you could go through a rollout and may not use what you're learning for 6 months. It has to be something that you can pick up 6 months from now, and it will be effective in training you. And that's probably, right now is the hurdle with people and processes, because you have to develop that process. You have to kind of rethink, not to mention that, it's changing, it's changing fast. So that's still where, it's kind of holding us back a little bit. You got to get
crawl, walk, run, and then I think we saw 48% of warehouse people, turn over. So you have to have a repeatable process for new people coming in and reinforce that message to the existing team. So Dwight, what skills are becoming more important in supply chain roles and which are becoming less relevant?
Well, I think that to add what Janet said, I think and this is particularly for the supervisory workforce, and this is, I said this yesterday and say it again today, is I think the biggest challenge we're going to have is we could have the best AI in the world, but if we can't get them to use it and continue to use it, it's just going to go for naught. And I love what you just said. We used to distinguish between training and education. Vendors and other people, we actually do a fairly good job of training. How we distinguish it, training was, okay, push this button, do this is the process and how you follow it. Education's what you do, why you do it, what's this information giving you. And the KPI presentation we heard this morning, I put a graph up there. Well, that's nice. What's it telling me? What do I do with that information? And I think that's the education that we need. And a lot of times that's where the change management. So if we don't do that, it's we're going to be giving these people, and then they're just going to revert back to expediting and seat of the pants decision making. And my fear there is we're going to get one warehouse up and running, and they're not going to see the results, and then you lose the momentum, and management's going to pull the budget. And we saw that in the past with labor management. We'd see companies, hey, they're gung-ho, they put up a labor management system, they put it up in a couple warehouses, run it for 18 months. No one was maintaining it, and then they just lose momentum, and people say we're not getting the value out of it. They kill the project.
Yeah.
And it was all because they didn't maintain it. They didn't get the people using it, even though it delivered some value, and it was a shame. And I think we got to be very careful of that. And I think it's going to continuous improvement, getting the people to use it, encouraging them. I would often say, hey, find somebody where you got a young person that's really aggressive, get them really engaged. They'll embrace the technology, we all have the silver clouds, or what I call the why nots. Every organization has them. People will tell you why something's not going to work. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges. But we're going to have to do it, because they're going to retire and we're going to lose all that tribal knowledge.
We got our last section here, closing and looking ahead. So Dwight, fast forward 3 to 5 years from now, what will feel completely normal that feels early or experimental today?
Well, I think, we talked about something like agentic AI and putting the human in the loop. I think as we get more experience, we will, and at least leading edge companies will allow the systems to make more of the decisions that early on, we're not going to want the systems to just do it autonomously. I think as we get more comfortable with the decisions that the system will make, that not all decisions, but there'll be certain decisions that we will just be comfortable enough that the system can just autonomously make the decisions on its own.
All right, Ed, what capability will separate leaders from laggards? What capability will separate leaders from laggards?
Yeah, we're in an ever-changing environment, as you know, and I think aligning with a technology stack that transforms with you. I mean, Locus started as a female safety application, and we've transformed into an agentic TMS, and it needs to be autonomous in the background. The majority of our customers, we're a headless system. We're optimizing their network in the back end. And so I think aligning with that type of technology, we can't live in dashboards anymore. I mean, that's going away. You have to trust the solution. You need to trust the technology to make those decisions. right? To leverage it and optimize, because if you're not, a competitor will. And that's where you've got to be quick and not lag.
All right, Janet. We want everybody to go home with some value. What's their takeaway? What's the call to action? What should this audience start doing differently as soon as they get back to the office?
Differently? Well, that's kind of hard to answer because everybody's probably already doing things different from each other. But I mean, I all I can say is the mantra that I say in my head every day: don't boil the ocean. You got to take baby steps. You got to take practical use cases, especially around AI. And, if you have a team of people, learn with your team, make it make sense, context, just like with the training, right? Just start small, because if you wait to be perfect at it, you're never going to get perfect, because it's always changing. So, believe me, this is back to me, because I always want to know, I always want to get to the, okay, I'm very comfortable, it's perfect, I know everything before I start to use it, and you can't do that. So that's why it's a mantra.
Excellent. How about a little round of applause for our panelists? Thank you guys so much for sharing different perspectives outside the four walls, analyst, real world, on the floor. Thank you guys for your time and attendance. Hopefully we were educational, inspirational, and entertaining.
Thank you.
All right.